one of the biggest stories in the news today, in addition to Donald Trump being held in contempt of court, is the story of how presidents, university presidents, are handling student protests that are erupting all over this country. Now, I have two daughters who are students at Columbia University, so I've been getting text messages pretty much for the last week or so from family and friends checking in to see how Michael and Morgan are doing, because Columbia University has been the epicenter of student protests. Started back in mid-April when its president was summoned to the Capitol and who was grilled royally by GOP lawmakers who were really on a mission to embarrass the president, to humiliate her, and in some ways to oust her in the way they had done with Claudine Gay, the first Black female president of Harvard University. Well, that same committee, that education committee, has announced that 3 more college presidents have been summoned to the Capitol. The president of Yale University, UCLA, and University of Michigan will have to testify before this committee. The head of the committee says she's going to continue to hold leaders of what she calls elite universities accountable for what she calls their lack of protection for Jewish students. The committee chair said that she has a clear message for what she calls mealy-mouthed, spineless college leaders. She says Congress will not tolerate your dereliction of duty to your Jewish students. That is a quote from Virginia Fox, a Republican from North Carolina, and the committee chair. We know it was Columbia University's president who was before Virginia Fox and her committee, really being forced to make statements that many on her own campus disagreed with, statements that caused some of her own faculty to vote, basically give her a vote of no confidence. And while she was on the Hill testifying, students were preparing tents and pitching tents and staging one of the biggest protests that we have seen in this country over the Israel and Hamas war. And once Columbia students show the world how they could organize so quickly using social media and private chat groups, other students, UCLA, students at colleges in Texas, colleges in the South, colleges all over the country, Boston, started protesting. And the question now is, where do the students go from here, and how will the universities continue to respond? Columbia called in police in the early stages of the protest, arrested about 100 kids. And before those kids could even get released, other kids had resumed protesting. And then we saw clashes with police on the campus of UCLA just over this weekend. Now, a lot of professors, a lot of presidents are saying calling the police, bringing in law enforcement is not the solution. Well, Columbia University announced today, as students took over one of its buildings, Hamilton Hall, that not only will they suspend students, that was their first charge that they were going to do. Now they are saying they will actually expel students. Now, if you are a parent or if you are a relative of someone at one of these universities, you know these universities cost a grip. Many of these universities are as much as $100,000 a year. So imagine you are the parent of a student that has been on one of these campuses for the last 2 or 3 years, and you've paid, or your student has had to take out loans to the tune of $250,000, $300,000. And now that student is expelled. I'll be asking, a former college president, is expulsion the way to deal with student protests? And if not, what should college presidents be doing in this moment? And where does she see these protests leading? Because colleges like Columbia have made it very clear that the students' demands to divest its funds from companies that supply arms to Israel, that is a hard no. We have graduations coming up and summer break. So what are these students likely to do once campuses go on break? We've got a lot to talk about. When we come forward, our good friend, Dr. Julianne Malveaux, who is a noted labor economist and also a former college president of Bennett College. She's going to join us and help us understand what's happening on these campuses and how college presidents are thinking about these issues and what they should be doing versus what they are doing. Well, there was some good news today. Brown University entered into a rare agreement between administrators and protesters. And as a result of this agreement, the pro-Palestinian protests ended at Brown. Demonstrators agreed to dismantle their encampment at the university, which had been removed by tonight. And university's leaders said in exchange that they would discuss and later vote on divesting funds from companies connected to the Israeli military campaign in Gaza. Now, this agreement came even as scenes of chaos continued to overtake U.S. Universities. Protesters at Columbia, New York, Portland State, and Oregon have both of those colleges. Students have occupied offices, and demonstrators at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill have replaced an American flag at the center of campus with a Palestinian flag. Now, more than 1,000 people have been arrested over the past 2 weeks after a crackdown on these pro-Palestinian encampments at Columbia. Pretty much, after the protest at Columbia just resulted in this cascade of student activism around the country. It's interesting because at Brown, which is in Providence, Rhode Island, students, they began pitching their tents on the main campus last week. Now, many said they would stay until they were forced out, adding that they were concerned about trying to end the violence in Gaza, not about violating university policies. But after discussions with administrators, Brown Divest Coalition and Jewish Voice for Peace, they issued a joint statement saying that they had reached an agreement with the university, which would not have been possible without the hard work of university encampments across the country. They say that collective power forced the university administrators to acknowledge the overwhelming support for Palestine on the campus. Now, this agreement lays out a series of steps for the months ahead. In May, 5 students are going to meet with 5 members of the corporation of Brown to argue for divesting funds from companies connected to the Israeli military. In September, Brown's advisory committee on research management will be expected to advise the university on this issue. And in October, the committee's recommendation will be brought to the corporation for a vote. This feels like a real moment of realizing the collective power of these students. And the question is, how come other universities, Columbia, where it started, rather than sending the police to arrest students, rather than suspending and now threatening to expel students, why not a conversation? Why not a negotiation? Why not listen to the students? And I think what's so galling about the way these universities have handled this is the issue of the Vietnam War. So when you think back to the Vietnam War and the protests that happened on college campus, many of those protesters are now heralded as heroes, that they were on the right side of history. And when you think about the 30,000 people that have been killed in Palestine since October 7th, something tells me that when we look back on this moment in our history, that these pro-Palestinian student protesters, they will be the generation of heroes. They will be the ones that we are applauding and acknowledging for their tenacity, for their determination, for their activism and their protest. So it seems like these universities learned nothing from the Vietnam protests. They learned nothing from Kent State, that horrible situation where law enforcement shot into a campus, killing 4 students. Dr. Malveaux is here, Dr. Julianne Malveaux. She's the former president of Bennett College, and I wanted to talk with her today. Yesterday, we talked to a professor, we talked to a law enforcement expert, but I wanted to talk to someone who's been in that hot seat, who's had to make those tough decisions. So welcome, Dr. Malveaux. I was just talking about the president, Brown, obviously took a different direction than Columbia, UCLA, and some of these other colleges. They sat down and talked with the students, and they came up with an agreement, and the students agreed to end the protests, and the university agreed to do some research into divesting its funds and then to take a vote in October. Is that what other universities should have done and perhaps avoided arresting 1,000 people and all the horrible headlines they're getting?
Areva, I'm looking at this Columbia with just abhorrence. You never call the police on your own students. You're a parent, you have young people at Columbia. You know, it's untenable that you would expel students with tuition paying parents, let me say, who people at University of Southern California, you know, people look forward to graduation. So to cancel a graduation, especially for this group of young people, they were class of 2020. They didn't get graduation at high school because of COVID. Now they're not going to get college graduation. And when I think about it, I remember one of my poignant tales from Bennett was a first generation girl who was from San Francisco. And she was a great student. And she was the youngest of 9 kids. She was the only one who had gone to college. Her grandmother and her uncle chartered a bus, and they had like 40 people on that bus, and they came across the country to watch baby girl graduate. And they did not behave. When I read my script, it said, please do not make unseemly noise. Well, they made unseemly noise. And there were not enough seats. We had certain number of tickets for a certain number of people. Those brothers and sisters took their picnic blanket and they spread out on the lawn. And then they had the temerity to put up a barbecue grill and make some ribs on my lawn. I'm like, what am I to do? But it was the exuberant joy that people feel when they see one of their youngins graduate. So to take that away from that young Muslim girl at USC who's first generation, it's criminal. I think these presidents, frankly, are a bunch of wusses. As you said, the brother at Brown, he said, let's talk. And, I think students understand. I mean, I've been in more protests than the law allows, starting from high school, going on up. And I think, Proposition J in San Francisco was named after me deliberately to divest city pension funds from companies doing business with South Africa. It passed in 1984 by an overwhelming majority. I think we got about 67 or 68%. But here's the deal. You cannot divest like that. You and I, both as grown people, we know that. As a 30-something, I was like, divest now. The brother who was the city treasurer called me and he said, can you come and talk to me? I said, sure, because I was getting ready to tweak it up. And he showed me, he said, you're an economist, you understand. He said, I can't take this money out like this without paying a major penalty that the city would have to pay. The legislation called for divestment within 90 days. He said, we can't do it within 90 days. He said, so can we come to some kind of agreement? Of course, I had like half of my posse with me. So he's like, well, I want a one-on-one. You never meet with the enemy by yourself. So, I had a bunch of folks with me. But I'm looking at these young people and the ones at Columbia, I think they're responding to the intransience of the president. Mm-hmm. The president, frankly, is wrong. She was at the World Bank. She was at the London School of Economics. I know people who know her. I don't know her personally. But she's, from what I understand, again, I don't know her, she seems very rigid. And that's what people are responding to is her rigidity. She's not gone halfway. She should have 6 or 7 of the students come to her office. Let's talk about it.
Yeah, she seemed to be responding, Dr. Malveaux, to what happened to her on Capitol Hill when she was there to testify. And Virginia Woolf, now this Republican from North Carolina, realizes that if she gets these college presidents, before her in her committee, gets it on national TV, that she can push them around, embarrass and humiliate them. She's now called for the presidents of Yale, UCLA, and the University of Michigan. She's made such disparaging remarks about the president. She has such low regard for what she calls these elite presidents. Republicans are on this kick to try to divide the nation along, those who are educated versus those who are not. And the irony is most of these people in college, Republicans, have a college degree themselves, but somehow, it's something bad about folks who get a college degree. Now all of a sudden you're an elite simply because you've, gotten better education.
Because you follow the rules. The rules are get educated, get a job. The rules are work hard, get ahead. So most of the people who are in college now, we all know some of the brothers and sisters of any race who party their way through school. But basically, most people come in, drill down, and work hard, especially when they're first generation or in marginalized communities, Black, brown, you know. So, but what Mike Johnson and his crew have done is they've weaponized higher education. And so, first of all, they're anti DEI. Secondly, they're anti critical race theory, even though they don't know what it is. And now they are taking reasonable student protest and turning it into you're anti Semitic. Well, the fact that you criticize Israel does not make you anti Semitic. And many, many Jewish people, not the majority, but many, do also criticize Israel. Why? Because it should be criticized, because Netanyahu is a bully and he has killed, you mentioned the number of 33,000 people. Areva, 13,000 of them have been children. They have been children. They have been, you've seen some of the pictures, little baby boys and girls with one of their limbs blown off. A little girl, CNN had a piece, it was harrowing, where the little girl was begging the reporter for water. And the reporter gave her a little bit, and she says, I can't give you more because there's so many other people who are going to want water. So she gave the child like a couple of sips. And and she was talking, the reporter person was talking to someone, said, is there any more water? And they said, no, we're waiting for a shipment. So children are basically thirsty. And so we talk about the suffering of Israelis, but we never talk about the suffering of Palestinians. And let me add, the Bible does say an eye for eye, but it doesn't say eye for 30 eyes. We lost 1,300 roughly Israelis. Netanyahu has killed 30-some thousand.
Right.
And again, the number of children involved is just, we all talk about how much, we love children. We sing that song, I believe that children are the future. We go to events. We don't believe that. Or which children? Which children?
And you raise a good point. One of the things that Professor David Eichhardt from Vanderbilt said yesterday was that this is all money driven. So I'm thinking about Brown. Brown makes this decision, enters into an agreement with the students, ends the protest. We know that a lot of the Jewish donors, the Bill Ackmans of the world, are saying to these universities, if you don't do more, if you don't crack down, if you don't protect Jewish students, we're going to pull our donations. We're going to pull our sizable, the monies that we give on a annual basis. And Dr. Eichhardt believed that a lot of these university presidents are responding to that. So how is it that Brown University and Ivy as well can enter into an agreement and not suffer the wrath of its Jewish donors, but Columbia, Harvard, and some of these others seem to be really beholden to their Jewish donors?
Well, it depends on the composition of the board and to what extent the president of the university has the confidence of the board. I think in the case of Dr. Claudine Gay, as an example, she hadn't been president a year. So she had not been able to develop the alliances that she needed to develop. But I will tell you from personal experience, your number one job as a college president is to raise money. I mean, you may have this lofty notion, I did when I went to Bennett, that you're going to change curriculum, which I did. You may have this lofty notion that you're going to build new buildings, which I did. But at the end of the day, I even brought in money. I did bring in money, but apparently, according to the board, I didn't bring in enough. Now, excuse my ironics, but ain't nobody brought in more to me after I left, but whatever. But they really were not satisfied with my fundraising acumen. And then, of course, I have this controversial personality that we can't do nothing about. And that probably aggravated them as well. But basically, at the end of the day, your job is to raise money. So if
that is your job, and you have Jewish donors saying you're not protecting Jewish students, we want these pro-Palestinian students expelled, we want them suspended, we want them off this campus. What is a university president to do? Since you just laid it out very clearly, number one job is bring in the money. I have two daughters at Columbia University, and my daughter just sent me an alert, Julianne, from the campus telling all the students not to, in fact, it says Morningside campus alert. Shelter in place for your safety due to heightened activity at the Morningside campus. Noncompliance may result in disciplinary action. Avoid the area until further notice. So the president has handled this so poorly that it has bled over into the student lives. My daughter says there's a police officer at the corner of her street. She had to show identification to even get onto her street. And let's put this in perspective. Columbia University has 13,000 students. At one point, there were only about 200 protesters. Now, there may be more now, but at one point, there were 200 protesters. And this has been handled so poorly that these 200 protesters have disrupted, or the university in the handling of these 200 protesters has disrupted the lives of 12,000, 800 other students.
What do these young people do if they're living in the dormitory? Can they get back into their dormitories? What can they do? A friend of mine called me earlier. Her son is there. He's an undergrad. He lives off campus with a bunch of people, but he has the meal plan. She got him the meal plan because she didn't trust that he would, handle, he's 20, that he would handle his business regarding food. So she just got the meal plan, even though he lives off campus. He can't get to and of course he did what he always does. We were laughing about it. He spent up all his food money, earlier in the month, but see, he had the food plan as insurance. So he knew he could always go get a bite or a cup of coffee or something on campus. Well, he can't get to the campus. So you
can't get to the campus. Morgan dates a guy who's at the business school, and he had a medical appointment, and the medical facility is in one of the dormitories on the main campus. And he is a student identification. He could not even access the urgent care on the campus. And this shelter in place, that's reminiscent of COVID days, right? Where we were told, don't leave our houses. What recourse? I would imagine that a lot of these parents, and I may be one of them eventually, they start suing this university.
You're the one. As soon as I said lawsuit, I said, Areva, you gonna call Areva. But at the very minimum, there needs to be something where these students who can't get to the meal plan, who can't get to the urgent care, that they're compensated in some way. Additionally, this whole notion of suspensions, you do not suspend seniors who are about to graduate. You do not suspend graduate students who are in their last semester. You do not deny them access to the resources they need to finish their papers, to complete their other assignments. And that's what's going on. Now, how are you going to compensate for that? All of us have walked in somebody's shoes, but this sister has just been inept. The only word that I can use is inept. But as you point out, the fact that Virginia Fox, North Carolinian Republican, she was horrible to Claudine Gay. She was horrible to the other two, the sister from Pennsylvania, from Penn, and then the sister from MIT. What the MIT scholar had in her favor is that her board refused to back down.
Yeah.
Others back down.
Well, let me just say this, Julianne. So the Columbia president goes, she kowtows to Virginia Fox, capitulates, makes all kinds of inappropriate statements. She reveals disciplinary actions against one of her faculty members, all trying to curry favor, only to have Mike Johnson show up, the Speaker of the House, a couple of days later and call for her resignation. So there is no winning with the GOP. It's not going to do you any good to go there and try to reason with them because they're not reasonable.
Well, you cannot bojangle your way to favor. And that's what she was doing. She's bojangling. And for those who don't know, just think about Mr. Bojangles. Just shuffling and jiving. And I met a band, Bojangles, and he danced with me. Well, they're dancing around the real issues. She thought that by mollifying Virginia Fox, she would get some favor.
Yes.
But she wasn't going to get any. She does not understand, and I don't know why. She's politically savvy. She was at the World Bank. She was at London School of Economics. She ought to have better sense. A campus is no different than any other institution that's a hierarchy where you have to manage up and down. It's no different. It's political. I don't understand.
Let me ask you this, though, Julianne. So if you're getting pressure from Bill Ackman donor. I'm going to call him a big donor, but he's a donor at Harvard. And you
good
got
man.
other Jewish donors saying, we want you to crack down on this anti-Semitism. We want you to, quash all these protesters. Republicans are calling for them to be suspended, expelled. Some are even saying, bring in the National Guard. And if they're saying, do this or else, we're going to pull our money. What do you do as a college president? Because you just told us job number one is to bring in the money.
I find me some Palestinian money. I find something that counters that, to say, look, I ain't scared of you. Because once you bow down, you're still on your knees. You're going to be on your knees. I would not. Claudine Gay was in a uniquely vulnerable position. She hadn't been president for a full year. She had already attracted the ire of the anti-DEI crowd who tried to call her out for that. So she was in a uniquely vulnerable position. And I think she's held her own as long as she could. Well, then she succumbed to the pressure. But you know what? If I had succumbed to the pressure, well, you know me, I don't play. There would have been press conferences. There would have been NAACP on campus. There would have been, there would have been several oh hell no moments. Ackman had more money than probably any constituency that Dr. Gay had. But you put all those constituencies together. I mean, the learning lesson is Summer Lee out of Pennsylvania. The young sister had attracted the ire of AIPAC because she was part of the squad, and one of the first to say that she wanted a ceasefire. She said very early on, like mid to late October, like there needs to be a ceasefire. Of course, Israelis were upset, and AIPAC said they found her an opponent the first time she ran, but she prevailed. This time they found another one, but the woman who all she did was beat the Israel drum. Summer went out and raised $1 million in one quarter and $1 million in the next quarter, or 915,000, whatever. But approximately $2 million in a 6-month period, less than 6-month period. She prevailed. Mm-hmm. So we can learn from that. I mean, let me just say this. Well, because it's important, anti-Israel is not anti-Semitic. They're not the same thing. And I don't think anybody is really anti-Israel, but I think people are critical of Israel. Who could not be critical? 33,000 people being massacred. Who could not be critical of people bombing schools and hospitals? I mean, if you have a human heart, you have to be critical.
Well, what you hear on the other side of that, Julianne, is, and I've had several of my Jewish contributors and guests who I love dearly, what they will say is, yes, the number is disproportionate, but Hamas, they will tell you, sole purpose in life is to destroy Israelis, and that they have to annihilate Hamas. Now, David Icahn yesterday told us that that's all propaganda, that Benjamin Netanyahu actually installed Hamas to avoid ever having to, create a two-state solution.
No, so he did not want to deal with the PLO. He did not want to deal with Yasser Arafat, who basically was pushing for a two-state solution. So they empowered Hamas, and they don't like the devil that they created.
Yes. And it's a very, very difficult geopolitical issue, and there's a lot of propaganda happening on both sides. But I hear what you're saying. Look, you can't capitulate. You cannot, get on your knees, because it's not going to help. These people are still going to come for you. So the best thing to do is to try to find some money from some other donors. When we come forward, Dr. Malveaux, I want to talk about HBCUs, because we know there have been Black students who have been leading some of these protests. One of the young students at Columbia, young Black guy, who's been banned from the campus because of his statements about Zionists. But we're not seeing these protests erupt on the campuses of HBCUs. You have a lot of experience working with historically Black colleges and universities. So when we come forward, I want to talk about, why do you think the protest movement hasn't caught fire on some of these campuses? In the meanwhile, Julianne, the Columbia chapter of the American Association of University Professors has issued a statement blaming the school's leaders for rising tensions. Columbia faculty have spent the day offering our help to diffuse the situation on Columbia's campus and have been rebuffed or ignored, the statement says. University leadership will bear responsibility for any injuries that may occur during any police action on our campus. I'm sure you're familiar with the Association of University Professors. That's a pretty bold statement from them, basically denouncing the handling of this situation by the university president. How long can this president last if you have your professors, many of whom have been out protecting the students, been out protesting with them, now saying that they're being ignored? And basically, if anything jumps off on that campus, this president's going to have blood on her hands.
Issue for their own benefit, and she's getting it from the left, from the professors and the students and the staff. Let's not forget, Areva, you have people who work at university campuses. They don't make a lot of money. The secretaries, the janitors, they're also being blocked for their livelihood. And so she's getting it from all sides, and it's all her fault. She's getting what she deserves.
Well, can she survive, you think, given all this pressure? I mean, you got the folks, the GOP calling for her ouster. You have students calling for her to resign. You have alumni. I'm in contact with a lot of Columbia alumni. They want her to go now. The Association of University Professors are basically saying she's mishandling this.
I don't think she's going to last long. I don't think she's going to last long unless she's able to rally those pro-Israeli donors to make some large contributions to make up for whatever they lose. But if she can't do that, if she can't rally them, and she may not be able to because there may not be enough of them. If she can't do that, her behind is toast. I mean, she's toast.
Looks like she's going that way. Let's talk about HBCUs, though, before we run out of time. We've seen Black students very active. A lot of Black students on Columbia's campus, my daughters have told me, are involved in the protest. And we know there's a Black junior undergraduate who has been banned because of some statements he's made. But why aren't we seeing these protests on the campuses of HBCUs?
Because we don't roll like that. Basically, we don't roll like that. We've done. Black students are not in a position to ask their presidents to divest. Many HBCUs don't have money to divest in the first place. But I will say this: it's interesting to see what's going on at Morehouse College, where the students have been rallying. President Biden was offered the opportunity to be the commencement speaker back in September, before anything jumped off in the Middle East. And but it wasn't announced until very recently. What's happened is that students, faculty, alums, they have written very harsh letters talking about the fact that Dr. King, who Morehouse always identifies with, of course, he's an alum, they're saying, if you identify with Dr. King, who got the Nobel Peace Prize, why are you having, they call Biden a war criminal, why are you having a war criminal on the campus? Now, President Biden.
Have they canceled him? I haven't heard that they.
President Thomas is not going to do that.
Okay.
I mean, President Thomas came from the Harvard Business School. I mean, he's a good guy, but not a good guy, but a good guy, and he plays a corporate game. Imagine what people would do if he canceled the president. I mean, that would be cataclysmic. At the same time, the students, some of the faculty, a young brother, he's been on the faculty not too long, he organized a bunch of professors to write a petition to say, we're not down with that. But I think that the graduation will go as it goes, and people will either suck it up. And as I said earlier, the thing about graduations is no matter what the controversy is, people want to see their baby boy, baby girl graduate. That's a joyful moment. So
speaking of graduations, what do you do in this moment? So you're campus president or your college president, you've got protesters. The last thing you want is, 20,000 parents on your campus and the optics of the police arresting or, trying to contain protesters. So what's Columbia going to do about its graduation? What is USC going to do about its graduation?
Well, USC canceled theirs.
So they canceled the main graduation, but they said the individual
the college graduations. Yeah, I think that you have to have respectful security, and that's not always the case. And in honesty, I was watching Columbia, and this young white girl was pouring water at the police. Now that's very provocative. It's not dangerous. It's water. It's gonna dry. But who wants to be on the other side of someone who's pouring water on you? And she was pretty aggressive. I don't know if there were mind-altering drugs involved, but she was very blessed that the police officer, who was the African-American man, He just stoically took it. But that's what police officers have to do in the circumstance. They have to stoically take it. You should not put your hands on a student. People should not be zip tied and arrested. But it's even for a graduation that doesn't have controversy involved, it's a logistical challenge under any circumstance. And so people just have to be aware that it is a logistical challenge. You have to figure out what to do and how to do it. One of the things that concerns me is that a lot of these so-called protesters are not students. That they've come to, like Columbia, well, you're in the middle of Harlem. Anybody can come onto the Columbia campus. Back in the day, we all did. We'd go there, grab a coffee, sit around. So the fact that many are not students suggests that some people are taking advantage of the moment to make their own point. But there is a point to be made around what's happening in the Middle East.
Let me just ask you before we run out of time, expulsion. If a student is expelled from any college, what are the chances of them being admitted to some other college?
Low, extraordinarily low, unless they have a lot of support, unless people, not their parents, professors and others are willing to write letters and say, John Jones was a great guy, he got caught up in X. But basically an expulsion could end your college career. Wow. And so again, I think it's a heavy-handed tool. Again, I mean, I could have been expelled. You probably could have been expelled. We were out there. We took over. I took an axe to the president's office at Boston College. An axe.
That's probably criminal conduct, Julianne. That's probably. I'm watching some of these students on Columbia's campus break these windows. Like that's trespassing. That's destruction of property. And I would advise any of the students that are out there protesting, please be peaceful, because there are cameras everywhere and they can identify you. You may have on a mask, you may have on a hoodie, but that's how they caught a lot of the they caught a lot of the January 6th protesters. They had cameras and then people turned in people as well.
There was a young lady, there was a CNN reporter interviewing a young lady who had her Arab scarf covering her face, and he said, "What's your name?" And she said, "I can't tell you." And I thought to myself, they already know.
They already know. And if you got to protest, which I'm all in favor of you exercising your First Amendment right, do not allow yourself to be drawn into criminal conduct. Breaking windows, trespassing, throwing bottles, throwing water on police. That police, as you said, was very kind, but that is an assault on an officer that could land you in jail. So I just, admonish the kids to be safe out there. Be safe out there. I appreciate you. Appreciate you, Julianne. We are out of time. Always a pleasure to have a conversation with you.
Take good care.